It all started with RuneScape, obviously. It was 2007 and I was 13 years old. Playing RuneScape with some friends from school, we decided to create this little clan and it needed a website. And so I went online and searched for how to create a website, and there I found FreeWebs. It was this online website creation platform. Select a template, write some text and you're done. Something like Wix or Squarespace these days. But when I had everything in place, I wanted to tweak this website just a little more. And so I discovered a HTML editor that came with the template and started playing around with the code over there. And it was pretty cool to change some colors and fonts, but that was about it. Now, it was my uncle who told me a couple of months later that you could in fact create whole websites with this kind of code, with text. And that intrigued me. So I started reading online and spending my daily computer time, which was limited, on playing with HTML instead of playing RuneScape. And it looked something like this. My first actual website was some kind of blog where I wrote about the things I had learned while coding. I didn't know about HTML entities back then, so when I wanted to show HTML on this website, I would replace all angle brackets with square ones so that they wouldn't be seen as actual HTML. Good times. I hosted this website on FreeWebs, and then I created a .tk domain pointing to it, which was the only free top-level domain back then. Now, unfortunately, FreeWebs stopped a few years ago. And even more annoying is that the Internet Archive, for some reason, hasn't archived this very first website. So I can only show you this screenshot. You can see it's pretty ugly, but it was something I created from nothing with code. And I remember that being a very special feeling. It gave me this adrenaline rush every time I worked on it, and I loved it. Unfortunately, in Belgium, where I live, there aren't many schools that focus on IT and programming, at least not before the last 2 years of high school, what's called, I believe, 11th and 12th grade in the US. So even though I knew what I wanted to study, I had to wait 3 more years before I could actually start. And I remember this being a very frustrating period, because at home I could write code and learn about websites, but at school I had to learn rather general stuff, chemistry, French, English, maths, biology, history, geography. The list goes on. But I remember telling some of my teachers of this dream of mine. And they said, yes, Brent, we know this is your thing, but you'll have to wait a little bit longer. And I got really demotivated because of that. I actually failed almost half of my classes in 10th grade. But luckily, my teachers knew what I wanted to do, so they didn't hold me back. So after 3 years, I could finally start studying what I actually wanted to do. We started with very basic programming. Literally, we started with Visual Basic. Programming in this way was new to me because up until that point I was working with static HTML and CSS, and suddenly there was this whole new world that I hadn't learned about before. It was pretty exciting. I remember using Visual Basic to create a program where you could design some kind of maze and export it to SQL queries. And those queries could be run on a private World of Warcraft server, of all things. And it would generate the maze as in-game objects so that I could play with friends. I did quite a lot more of this kind of database programming where I'd build special events for my friends to play in World of Warcraft. At school, we spent around half a year working with Visual Basic. And then we moved to Java to learn some more in-depth object-oriented programming. And this was a difficult change at first. We were writing Java, but we didn't have much visual output. At best, there were some log messages, text output. And this went on for months. We were focusing on principles and patterns and not so much on actually building something. And I found that difficult in the beginning. I was so used to making something tangible, and suddenly the only result of our code was text. Now, luckily, there were other courses focused on web development and web design, but still it took a while to make that mind shift. But Java wasn't all bad. I started playing Minecraft around this time. And with some Java knowledge, I could once more write code that actually felt like it did something, code that had a purpose. I started writing some Minecraft server plugins. And alongside that, I also learned PHP at school. And with PHP, I built a truly dynamic blog and helped with setting up a forum for my Minecraft community. I was nearing the end of high school by now. And so I started thinking about what I wanted to do next. There weren't that many options, either go to college or go working. And I definitely wasn't ready to start work yet, so college it was. I decided to go for a bachelor degree in computer science. And it was clear from day one that this was something completely different than what I'd been used to. It was very theoretical at first. We learned about stacks and heaps, operating systems, assembly, memory management, compilers, but also stuff like accountancy and algorithms and maths. And I remember wondering where all of this was going. This was like the Java course in high school, but times 10. Looking back on it, I would say that I learned almost nothing actionable during those 3 years in college, but I did get a lot of knowledge about what's going on behind the scenes, about the mindset of a programmer. Now, I do think there is some value in having a degree in computer science, but it doesn't say anything about whether you're a good programmer or not. I can safely say that all the skills I've used in my professional programming career, they didn't come from education, but rather from practice. Now, remember, this is 10 years ago. Things might have changed. I'm not sure. At the end of my 3 years in college, there was still a couple of months for my internship. I chose a web development agency, and this was a huge wake-up call. That internship at your average web agency, it was so boring. I was building something visual, some kind of analytics dashboard for their CMS, but the idea of writing code just to help companies make more money without any higher goal, it destroyed almost all fun I ever had in programming. Right after that internship, I graduated, but I was at a total loss. I actually didn't go to my graduation ceremony. I truly didn't care about it anymore. I was thinking about maybe studying something completely different, but first I had to earn some money to pay for potential new studies. And so I went on to help a small startup company doing some programming during the summer. And this was actually quite fun. I didn't expect that to happen. There were good colleagues. I was building an API with PHP, so nothing visual, but I guess that their business problems were interesting in themselves, so solving those became a tangible result. And while this job didn't last forever, it gave me hope that professional programming shouldn't always be as bad as my internship. Now, on top of that, I wanted to marry my girlfriend, so having a steady job was probably a good idea. I gave another startup a chance, but they really weren't a good match. So I finally ended up with another web agency, kind of similar to my internship, but maybe my expectations weren't as high anymore. So I gave it a chance. Writing code professionally for clients had almost nothing to do with that passion I felt for coding a decade earlier. At least that was my experience during my time at this agency. There were clients with unreasonable expectations. There was never enough money to actually do things right. And on top of that, this company forced their employees to lie against their clients. They made some very questionable technical decisions. It wasn't a good time. By the end of 2017, I was ready to quit programming and simply start working at a grocery store or something like that. I could tell you a bunch of stories about what happened there. I actually did a podcast series about this time in my life, but unfortunately it's only available in Dutch for now. But in summary, I felt truly miserable. Even looking back on it now, thinking about that passion I felt when I was 13 years old, it's hard to find the words to explain my feelings back then. How could something that I was so passionate about in the beginning become something I despised on a daily basis? There was one spark of hope. My blog. I had this blog where I wrote about programming related stuff, PHP mostly. And this was that one small thing I had where I could focus on my passion. On one hand, I wrote the code for this blog myself, and on the other hand, I wrote about interesting programming problems I came across just for the sake of learning and writing. My blog is what kept me motivated for at least a couple more months. And right at the time when it started to feel like it wasn't enough to keep me going anymore, I came across a new place. I started working at Spatie, a small agency in Belgium, but one that's not only focused on client work, but also on open source. Spatie was really the change I needed to fall back in love with code. Of course, there still was client work, and clients still had unreasonable expectations from time to time. But we had a whole other way of dealing with those expectations. We didn't make any promises that we couldn't keep. We focused on quality over quantity. And for some reason, this company was able to make a sustainable business model out of that. Every week, I could work on open source projects. And even some of my own projects, like my blog, things that Spatie didn't make any money with. But because of those projects, I was gaining energy and enough to be able to take a hit once in a while when something less exciting needed to happen. And it didn't stop there. Over the past 2 years, I was given the opportunity to work on a number of books and courses for Spatie. I was allowed to write and teach about code, make videos and vlogs, all because of our shared passion for programming. That brings us to today. I loved working at Spatie, but when I was asked by JetBrains to help them work primarily on PHP-related content and to connect with the community, I knew I had to take that chance. I've left all client work behind. My job right now still involves programming, but only the projects I want to work on, to learn, to grow. In a way, it feels like I'm that 13-year-old again, rediscovering his passion for code and connecting with the community, just like I did with RuneScape and World of Warcraft and Minecraft. I didn't plan for this. I never thought about a career plan. I did learn to focus my creative energy on the things I liked: my blog, newsletters, podcasts, interacting with the community, making videos, and now working at JetBrains. I still don't have a plan. I just try to enjoy the moment here and now as much as possible. If you came here to learn some kind of life lesson about programming, I'd say this is it, at least for me. Don't plan ahead. Find joy in programming here and now. Whether it's in your job or not depends, but striving for that childlike excitement is probably a good idea. Leave a like, subscribe, let me know your thoughts in the comments. You know what to do. Until next time.